Morning. So you have, like 8 minutes to finish the quiz if you're still working on it. And for people to kind of roll in, check. Oops. Sorry. So you have another 5 minutes. So a couple people are still working on the quiz. You got like 3-ish minutes left if you haven't uh, taken it already. Okay. Got like a minute left. Okay. So if you were still taking it, probably got kicked out. Before Crystal presents, I wanted to kind of go over the memoir with you guys, which is your next assignment. So let me get rid of this. Away. All right. Your memoir. I was due this Saturday. I am fine if you kind of turn it in Sunday. I'll give you an extra like day. It's kind of a soft deadline. I still have a lot of grading for my other classes, so probably won't get to them super soon. So if you need to take a little bit more time, that's fine with me. All right, so I want you to write a memoir about your experiences or a singular experience in which you became aware of how you or other individuals were treated differently because of gender, sexuality, sexual identity, race, or some kind of intersectionality. Intersectionality is more than one of those. Connect this with the material we have studied in class so far about how gender is learned. So try to, and about other kinds of, privilege, how race is a social construct, how class kind of affects it all. And then consider, when did you first become aware of being treated differently because of a physical characteristic you couldn't control? Or, what are some events or experiences from your personal life that made you realize that men were treated differently, that white people were treated differently, that straight people were treated differently, or some combination of the above? You can also consider your experiences with your family, with media, with the workplace, relationships, stuff like that. You don't have to answer all those questions. Those are just some questions to consider. All right. Try to analyze the meaning of your experience instead of just writing about your experience. Kind of analyze what it shows. What does it demonstrate about our culture? What has it taught you about yourself and your identity? What has it taught you about other people? This is 3 to 4 pages, typed and double spaced. Try to quote at least some of the material we have read and discussed in class so far. If there's, kind of say where they came from and stuff. Oops. This is how I will be grading you. So basically includes a description of a personal experience dealing with gender, sexuality, race, or some other form of diversity, includes analysis, and connects to text. Those are kind of the 3 things I'm going to be looking for. And then, makes sense and is readable, shows complex thinking development, meets links requirements, fulfills assignments submitted correctly. Okay, good. Any questions about this? Let me know if you need a little more time because I didn't tell you about this very well earlier in the week. Yeah, okay. So I am gonna make it so that Crystal can kind of take over and get us started talking about class and privilege.
Can I share it now?
You should be able to share it now, yes. Good.
Okay, so today, I know that we had readings as far as privilege in class go, but this is kind of what my biggest takeaway was from it. As I was like looking up pictures, I kind of like thought of this one, and I thought like this was the best way to kind of describe both of them, at least for the beginning, because all of these little factors come into play. As far as the reading goes, I know that some of these were recommended and others were required. The 10-minute reading is all about how the closing of like gaps, whether it be with families financially or even like responsibility, and how that all of these myths that are here are still not true today, and that there's still like really big gaps, like thousands of dollars or even like a couple of hundreds. As far as the class reading goes, it basically said that class is more or less the American dream. And the biggest quote that kind of like stood out to me is, anyone who works hard enough will succeed, and those who do not succeed must have not worked hard enough, which honestly isn't true on any aspect of things, because we could work super hard to get an A, and our professors could think, no, this is only C material. So that's kind of what I took away from that as well. It also said that, as like I said before, that class is the American dream, which more or less in their definition is wealth. And for wealth, it's like having a great job, making lots of money, owning a house, a car, and owning all of the like fancy gadgets, whether it be iPhones, laptops, whatever it might be. And the other one, which was also a recommended reading, was The Income and Wealth. On the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about that. So on the income and wealth, this is just, obviously it's not really like up to date. It's a couple of years old now. But the thing that mainly stood out to me the most is that on the household income for like the median of 2018, that whites were still making $29,281 more than blacks were. And it's just like surprising, because like we're into like that was 2018, and now obviously we're not in 2018, but what if this number is still that big of a gap? Like, and here we are thinking that like times have changed. As far as class goes, obviously we know that class is more or less broken up into 3 different sections. But I also found 2 different kind of interesting definitions for class. So the first one is a set of categories or things having some property. Um, so like that's like interesting to think about because we don't really like when I think of class, I honestly only think of the 3 different like categories and not really like what it is. And then the other one is the systems of ordering a society in which people are divided into set bases on social or income status, which I feel like is the one that we all really know. Um, so for privileges, obviously, there is a lot of different ones. So I only did a couple. So regular privilege, a special right advantage to a particular person or group. And then social privilege is a theory of special advantages used to one's benefit. These groups can be broken down into social class, age, height, IQ, disability, race, gender, sexuality, or orientation or religion. And the biggest one that I feel like is talked about, but not really when it comes to like schools and stuff, is white privilege. I just feel like this is kind of like relevant. Like the picture that I chose is relevant to like everything that's going on. It says, I'm done wearing a mask. It's been months of fearing for my safety when I leave the house. And the other guy that is obviously like safe and wearing a mask and gloves, he says, try feeling like that your whole life, which I think really shows a lot. But as far as white privilege goes, it's the advantages of a white person based on their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. And then I just have a video. Can you guys see it?
Yep.
Born into families where they have to walk miles
Can you hear it too?
Yep.
just to get water. All I have to do is turn on a faucet. That's privilege.
If you have ever tried to change your speech, if you were embarrassed about your clothes or house, if you would never think twice about calling the police or in trouble with
I think privilege is when some people have some things and other people don't have things.
I feel privilege is something that you don't even really have control over.
I think it'd be silly for me to say I don't have a fair amount of privilege, considering like the country I live in and the job I get to do and the college I was allowed to go to.
I suppose being a white male will help me end up somewhere towards the front, but I'll take a few steps back from being gay.
I don't think I'll make it to the front. I think I'll maybe be in the middle. That's just a gut feeling I have.
If your parents work nights and weekends to support your family, take one step back. If you can show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence, take one step forward. If you were embarrassed about your clothes or house while growing up, take one step back. If you have ever been diagnosed as having a physical or mental illness or disability, take one step back. If you have ever been bullied or made fun of based on something you can't change, take one step back. If you get time off for your religious holidays, take one step forward. If you came from a supportive family environment, if you can see a doctor whenever you feel the need, if you are able to move through the world without fear of sexual assault, if you took out loans for your education, if there were more than 50 books in your house growing up. So these are your final positions.
I think it felt kind of strange for everyone.
It's a hard thing to discuss or even reflect on. It was very awkward.
I think when you can represent it so visually like this and so immediately, it definitely takes on a new form.
I think we were like all joking around in the beginning. It was pretty lighthearted, and as soon as the questions started coming in, the mood shifted immediately, and we all it was just silent.
Just looking back and seeing like a bunch of people behind you is not a good feeling.
It's like weird how you want to like hold on to explaining a certain privilege, like, oh, but that's not actually me, because like I had to work really hard for that. So it's weird to like take a step forward when you feel like you're taking a step forward with someone else, but you wear a lot of the baggage of like how those things were hard.
It was like more emotional than I thought it would be.
It reminded me of when they talk about slavery in high school and you feel like angry for a few days, but then you just realize like, this is how it is.
For me, it was kind of frustrating almost to look back and see how much further some people were behind me, and realizing that, you know, a lot of that stuff, no amount of hard work or even legislation can make up that gap.
It's interesting being an Asian American because you're not really sure where you fall on the spectrum of privilege.
I know that for me, one of the reasons I ended up so far back was that there are questions around safety as an African American, as a woman, as a gay woman. There are just so many different ways that I don't feel safe.
I feel like I just learned to be grateful for what you have. You know, we're in such a huge society where it's always complaining about what you don't have.
It just shows you that for some families, like each family, you're meant to do better. My grandparents did good, my parents did good, and I'll do even better.
I do think if you're not like aware of privilege, you should do this exercise, but it's more complicated.
And then I just have some questions. As I was like reading and watching the video, this is where my questions mainly came from. So the first one is, do you think there's a bigger problem with class or privilege? My answer for this question is, I feel like there's a bigger problem as far as privilege goes. As we've seen with the BLM movement, it's still like not fair. So.
And some of those issues with privilege could probably help the issues that we have with class as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too. But I also feel like in a sense that one is like heavier than the other in a way. But at the same time, they do work hand in hand, like you said. The second question that I have, is there a way to change people's thoughts about the way that they look at privilege?
I think so, but I also think that it can be hard depending on each individual, because some people are just not open to hearing others' like opinions and views on things, and they don't want to accept that like they could be a part of a problem.
Yeah, I get that 100%. That's what I was thinking too when I asked it. I also feel like in a way, like we could do whatever, however we want to try to change people's mind. But if they're so stuck in their own head, in that headspace that they have about what's right and what's wrong, nothing's really going to change. And as far as the last question goes, what are you most worried about in the years to come with both of these topics?
I guess I'm just worried that like about how long it's going to take for things to get better, especially with like privilege and stuff.
Yeah, that was one of my biggest like worries too, because like I have nieces and nephews too, so like for them to kind of like grow up with this like time. Like, yeah, it was worse way back when, but I just feel like now it's more like known about, and like people have certain thoughts and like issues that they could like pass on to like young minds, but that won't really ever help things. So, and then that's all I have.
Nice job, Crystal. Yay. Let's see. Let me share my screen.
I did have one question for you though.
Please, yes.
I didn't put, do I need a works cited for that?
When you kind of submit it to Canvas, a works cited is always helpful.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'll submit it at the end because I didn't put a works cited.
Sounds good. So there's all kinds of stuff that we can talk about today. Crystal, when you were talking, it reminded me, do you guys know that Biden, one of his first kind of moves as president, what was, do you know? He wanted to change the minimum wage.
Yeah, he was gonna change it to $15, but is he still doing that? I heard he's not doing that anymore.
It died in the Senate.
Yeah.
So it was not able to be passed because of the Senate is more heavily conservative. The House of Representatives is usually kind of considered the more liberal house, and the Senate is more conservative. And supposedly they're all Democratic, but not even that could pass, not even with everything more heavily weighted Democrat. I did talk about your memoir. This was to remind me if I hadn't done so already. All right. This is just a brief review of kind of what Crystal had. You guys know what the American dream is? Tell me about the American dream.
It's like having a good job, lots of money, fancy car, nice house.
Yeah.
All those kind of things.
Yeah. So the American dream is to kind of be successful because you work hard. And that kind of translates to being economically successful. Good, Mandy. It's also called meritocracy. You get rewarded based on your merit. I'm sure you guys have heard of like merit-based scholarships that kind of like reward you for being smart. In America, there's this idea that you're rewarded with money for working hard. If you work hard, you'll get ahead. If you don't succeed, you must not have worked hard enough. And this is a kind of like a victim blaming strategy, right? Those who are poor are just lazy, right? And those who are rich must have worked hard. Most people consider themselves middle class no matter how much money they have. But actually, if you look here, wait, no. What is the thing that I was gonna have? Oh, you know what? Actually, it's actually in my presentation. Most people consider themselves middle class. Hold on, I'm gonna just show you an image. Oh no, that was it. Look at the bottom. This is holdings of families' wealth. So most people consider themselves middle class, but the bottom 50% of Americans are kind of living in poverty. And then this is this is the other 50% of Americans. And then this is the wealth held by the top 10% of Americans. Blah, blah, blah. Going back. Okay. So most people consider themselves part of the middle class because they want to distinguish themselves from the low class. So my parents were teachers growing up. So, I mean, they got paid pretty little. But they always were like, no, we're middle class, we work hard for what we get, right? That's the kind of thinking. It's crazy how those two things immediately kind of go together. And then in the United States, socioeconomic class has been constructed as binary. You're either middle class or you're poor, which kind of erases the top, which kind of lets them kind of retain their privilege. If you're scrabbling with people of your own for like the crumbs, like you don't unify and kind of go after the people on top to get a more equal distribution, right? The other thing I wanted to kind of talk about is like, when we talk about class, it's almost always kind of socioeconomic. And like the important part is the hyphen, right? Like the linking of these two words. In the United States, one's economic status brings social standing. You're more respected if you have more money. Those who have more wealth have more cultural capital. And it's kind of reflected in non-monetary class differences, such as tastes in food, or music, knowledge. I'm gonna skip those for now. I can't remember what I was thinking of. Anyone want to kind of take a stab at like answering these random things that I have no idea what I So social standing, examples of social standing, I guess, that kind of go along with economics. Do you have any examples that you kind of want to offer up?
I mean, you can stop me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's kind of what this is like. Let's try to figure this out through
out of
example.
context. But I was thinking more of the lines of like FAFSA, for example. So like a lot of our FAFSA and stuff like goes off of our parents' taxes and things like that, and not our own personal. So like I'm signing as an 18-year-old a loan in my name, right? But this loan is like based off of like my parents' taxes, and depending on the class they're in and depending on the amount of money like economically they make and everything, it depends on how much money technically the state gives me, but it's in my name. So I don't know, I feel like that would be maybe an example.
Yeah, so the FAFSA and how much help you get from the government. And also, I don't know about you guys, but like a lot of where I applied to college was dependent on like like I almost applied to like all safety schools in the hopes that I would get scholarships. Like, so like even your choice of schools, not even like whether you get in, but your choice of schools where you apply to can kind of be directed. The one I always think of most when it comes to like economic kind of reflecting social standing is clothes. So like if you kind of compare a name brand fancy designer shirt to like a Walmart shirt, you know, there are differences, but they're not different enough to kind of explain the price difference, right? So you're paying for more social capital, and you get social capital by paying, right? For a fancy, you know, name brand, you know, shirt, shoes, coat, stuff like this. Is that
you see it in grocery stores too? So like a lot of like Aldi's, I love Aldi's, but Aldi's is like all non-name brand, but a lot of people like view Aldi's as for lower income people, lower class people, and like that's not the case. Like food is food, you know?
Yeah. And Trader Joe's too, right?
Cheerios for it.
Yeah. Get the name brand Cheerios, not the off-brand Cheerios. Like, yes. So that's a really good, like, you know, even the grocery stores you go to. So like Aldi's versus Wegmans was on my partner's trip home from work. And so we always ended up at Wegmans, but like whenever we told our neighbors, like we usually shop at Wegmans, they're like fancy rich people, right? Which I'm not saying we're not super privileged, right?
I have another example that I was thinking of. I mean, I could be wrong too. But as far as like group home and foster home, would that be more to the lower class or no, because government technically in a sense pays for that?
Say it again. What kinds of homes?
Like foster homes and like group homes?
That's an excellent question. So I think the idea of like a foster home is, well, it's interesting because kids are almost like the lowest, most erased class, right? They don't have money and they're not allowed to make money, and like they're totally dependent, right? And so if you don't have any adults, like you probably are a lot poorer. And also a lot of times the people who get kind of taken away from their parents and put into foster care are people who are already pretty low, have a very little social capital. little economic stability, maybe probably more likely to be people of color, often likely to kind of be children of single mothers, right? So that's a good question, Crystal. And I think like sorry, Jared. Yes, that's okay. I was gonna type back to you, but yes, go for it, Jared. Sorry, he had messaged me. Yeah. Now I'm distracted myself. I'm gonna talk about the 1% film in more depth, but I might come back to it if that's okay with you guys. Okay. Were you able to watch it? Please just be honest. Like you were, some of you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, good. All right. So, okay. All right. I'm never sure if like Hoopla and the Boston Public Library card is actually working for you. So, no, like, all right. So I'm going to kind of come back to this, and instead, like, it helps to kind of talk about, when you're talking about class, it can help to kind of talk about wealth versus income. All right. So what do you think? Discussion 7.1, take like 4 minutes to kind of think about and kind of try to understand for yourself and work, or you can do research. What do you think the difference is between wealth versus income? Okay. So take till like 10:07, 10:06, 10:07. Sorry, I need to turn notifications off. Good, Martha. You're right. Mhm. Yep. Right. Good. All right. So it's kind of generational. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Good. So you guys have it kind of mostly down. I'm never sure kind of when you're coming in, like if you've discussed this in your economics classes, the kind of difference between, wealth and income. It sounds like you guys are pretty educated about it. Let me share my screen. So in sociology, the kind of distinction between wealth and class, or sorry, wealth and income. So like both wealth and income go into making up your social economic class. So the idea is that income is like the money made regularly. Wealth is assets, so things you inherit or own outright: houses, boats, diamonds, art, bonds, stocks. You guys all have tons of that stuff, right? Got diamonds just laying around your dorm room, and you take your boat out on the weekends, working on your stock portfolio. Minus, okay, good joke. That went over well. Minus debts. So it's like things you own or inherit minus the money you owe. Things like college payments, car payments, mortgage or rent, your medical bills, your credit card bills, plus their interest, etc. So the idea is like income is money you make regularly. Wealth is kind of assets minus debts. And the weird thing is that like a lot of times, the more wealth you have, the less likely you are to get an income, because you're independent, wealthy, you don't need an income, right? Sometimes having a good income can lead to wealth, but more oftentimes, true wealth is kind of inherited, and it means you don't have to have an income. And the problem comes when these numbers are a little bit misleading. Why do you think so? So we have here, it kind of shows like the median income for Black families is usually around $35,000 a year, and their wealth is only about $7,000. The median income for Latinos is about 42. Their wealth is 9, and the median income for whites is around 60. Yet their median wealth is like 100K. I don't think I'm asking this very well. What do you notice?
That the wealth is a lot higher than the income.
For whites, especially, like they're all kind of like these are all kinds of problematic on their own. But then you kind of look over here, and that's a real serious problem. And what I was thinking is like, this can lead to a lot of like, this can lead to kind of racist policies, right? Class in a lot of ways in America is linked to race, and race is linked to class, in part because communities of color have been kept in very low economic situations and kind of stripped of their money and stripped of their holdings and stuff like that, prevented from owning homes, stuff like that, throughout kind of American history. And this kind of snowballs, especially if a lot of you guys kind of talked about how, wealth is something you inherit. A lot like, people of color, especially African Americans, have only been able to make money in America since, 1860, right? Whereas Americans, or white Americans, sorry, that was a bad flip. Whereas white Americans have been able to make money, oftentimes at the expense of Black Americans, since 1650. So they've got at least 200 years. And then you kind of take into account all the ways that African Americans have been prevented from making money. And you can start to see the explanation of this, right? Yeah, okay, let's keep going. I think, This is kind of another way to think about this. So this is income by race. Asians make a lot more. Whites are close to Asians, Hispanics, and then Black are on the bottom. Anything surprise you about this? Are you surprised? Or did you kind of know? This is like median net worth of households by race. And so like class gets linked a lot to race, and then it gets linked to morality in America. So tell me about, so in this way, this is why white privilege, that article was kind of with the class readings, is because I feel like white privilege and class privilege are mutually reinforcing. If you look at this, tell me about this kind of graphic. Hold on. This one right here. So this graphic says income does not determine your wealth. David makes $150,000 a year. Steve makes $50,000 a year. But David doesn't invest, and he doesn't have a budget, and he doesn't have a side hustle. And he's very materialistic. And so at the end of every year, David is left with $0, whereas Steve takes his $50,000 a year, invests and budgets and has a side gig or a side hustle like driving Lyft or Uber, and is not materialistic. He doesn't buy much. At the end of every year, Steve is left with $25,000. What do you think of this graphic? What are some of the messages of it?
I think Steve is kind of more, he has more of that wealth while David has more of that income. He might look better like to the people around him because he's making that larger check every week. But at the end of the day, I think Steve would kind of have, I don't want to say more of the American dream, but he's investing more and he has more money in his bank. So he kind of, I don't know, that wealth kind of affects how you feel, I guess. It's a weird concept.
But suppose Steve is like, maybe we say David is a lawyer and Steve is like, working in a plant, making cars.
Well, then David's going to look a lot better.
Except for this bit, like it's
right.
This moral thing, like, if you don't have money to work with, no matter what your income, like, that means you're just a bad person. You're like, no good. you're shallow and short-sighted and stuff like that. Yeah, does that make sense? So here's an example of kind of like this idea of like the more money you have means like reflects how good of a person you are. And a lot of this is also kind of tied to masculinity. You remember our day about masculinity? What is it that makes a man, and a lot of kind of traditional understandings?
Money.
Yeah, he's a provider, right? So he's able to provide financially for his family. And if he's unable to do this, it kind of threatens his masculinity. It threatens his like sense of self. It's very disturbing, and kind of, so people start to look for scapegoats. This is why I'm not making money. It's, immigrants, or this is why I'm not making money. It's blah. And that's in part why Trump won, is because he kind of appealed to the white male kind of who feels like it's other people's faults that he's kind of been disadvantaged, and not the people on top, right? Okay. So here's another kind of bit of support for my idea that like class is race, is African Americans have a much harder time breaking into the middle class, and they're more likely to fall back into the poor classes within a generation than their kind of white counterparts, even with the same income and stuff like that. And you can read this article, I'll post a link to kind of talk about why. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Tell me about white privilege.
It's an issue. Well, it's one of the biggest problems in America.
Yes. So white privilege, which I'm saying is kind of really linked to class privilege, is a really big issue, and we're taught not to see it or recognize it. Peggy McIntosh says it's an invisible knapsack. And it helps to explain why certain groups, like white people, are seen as oppressive, even if we don't see ourselves that way and have never individually or intentionally attempted to benefit at the expense of others. It helps to explain why we're seen as still oppressive, is because like we don't see this invisible knapsack of advantages that we carry around just by virtue of our skin color or by our, which is also kind of linked to what class we're born into, right? And so this is, again, like, also, you're not really supposed to talk about class or money in America. Have you ever heard this? Younger people are less likely to be affected by this, but once you get a job, it's kind of considered taboo to talk about your income. And employers really discourage employees from kind of sharing and talking to each other about their income. What are some of the effects of this, do you think?
Raises.
And gender discrepancy in pay, right? You're supposed to negotiate your own salary, which kind of assumes, like, it puts the kind of, blame / responsibility on you rather than on your employers to actually pay a living wage. Yeah, so we're not supposed to talk about class. We're uncomfortable talking about money. We're not supposed to talk about wealth. You're not supposed to ask people how much they make a year. I remember I asked a substitute teacher once when I was a kid how much she made a year, and my parents thought that was horrifying. So it's like America's dirty secret is like this whole thing. But when we work to benefit others, this is seen as work that allows them to be more like us. Okay, so this is one of Peggy McIntosh's kind of big things. So we're taught not to see privilege. We're taught to kind of think that we worked really hard for what we got. And when we're told we have privilege, the kind of response is that, like, no, I worked really hard, it's a threat to our identity and our sense of self to kind of say you had unearned privilege, right? Or conferred dominance. And then when we try to kind of get rid of like class or race divisions, it's work that allows them, people of color or people of lower classes, to become more like us. So it's like programs like affirmative action and stuff like that. You must, education is what is gonna help you get ahead. It's not like taking care of structural inequality. All right, so examples of white privilege. What are some examples that kind of stood out to you from the reading, or ones that you have thought of yourself?
One of the ones that kind of stood out to me was when she's talked about, like, it kind of reminded me of the whole like George Floyd thing, because she brought up like the issue of like a check, whether she pays in like check or cash or like credit card or whatever. So that kind of was one of the main ones that stood out to me. Another one was when she talked about like second like hand-me-downs.
Yes. Yeah. So whether you buy new clothes for your kids or, whether you give them hand-me-downs, right? Others who kind of, any kind of privileges that stood out to people?
One that really stood out to me, so I wrote these on the side over here, but it's the last one. I can choose blemish cover or bandages in flesh color and have them more or less match my skin.
I knew Band-Aids were racist.
Right. So I just finished a book called Knots and Crosses, and it's on reverse racism. It was a great book, and one of the parts of the book was the main character. She was Black, and then knots were white, and she like looked at this white person and was like, oh my gosh, like, why is your Band-Aid so dark against your skin? She's like, well, they don't make like flesh colored Band-Aids for us. And like just the comparison and everything. So that one really stands out to me. It's small things.
Right. In the last couple of years, they have started making Band-Aids in other skin tones. Have you guys seen these? They're around. They cost double and triple the amount of white Band-Aids. So they're still slowly, we're kind of thinking about this. So like the idea is like, the other thing is like a lot of times people are against people of color moving into their neighborhoods. I kind of see this with my neighbor. She's kind of racist. She's an old lady. She's an old Italian lady who's lived in Worcester her whole life. And she doesn't like Black or brown people. Like anytime she kind of has some move into the complex, she's kind of like, they're terrible. Like they're no good, and it's like never has to do with their race, but nevertheless, it's there. When my partner and I were looking at houses to rent in Worcester, and we were grad students, we had like no money. And so we were running around looking at places to rent. We looked at one place and the landlord, was talking to us and stuff like that, and like talking about the neighborhood and stuff like that and how convenient it was. And then he points to one house down the street and he's like, oh, that's where the Huxtables live. You guys know that reference? Who the Huxtables? That's from the Cosby Show. So Bill Cosby and his Black family were like upper middle class Black family, right? He was a doctor and she was a lawyer, or she was a doctor and he was a lawyer, can't remember. And so like the one house of color on the block, he called the Huxtables, and we were like, well, it's a good thing we're white, right? Because otherwise he wouldn't have rented to us, right? And so this is another thing. Whites have a lot more access to houses and housing. We won't be harassed while shopping. You can see people of your race widely represented in history, in media. This is always one that gets me. Like, you don't have to like pick your hairdresser based on, you can just go into any salon and get a haircut, because everyone's taught to cut, white, straight-ish hair. And, you can get products anywhere. You can swear without being seen as ignorant. This is always one that kind of really hits home for me, because I kind of love swearing. And I'll never be seen as like ignorant or uneducated, even if I swear, in part because of my race and also because of my class privilege. And I'm never asked to speak as the spokesperson for my group. I'm never kind of pointed out in class and kind of like, a teacher has never kind of pointed to me and like been like, as a, person of color, what do you think about this issue, right? So I've never really been singled out, and I can criticize the government. Yeah. Okay. Acknowledging privilege is really hard because in a lot of ways it means giving up our own kind of unearned privileges. That's the other thing that makes it really hard. Like we don't want to give it up, especially in this day and age when there's less and less money around. Yeah. Changing individual people's attitudes will not work. We need to change the system. Part of that, I feel like, is increasing the minimum wage, for instance. So if you go to discussion 7.2, there is a video about privilege walks. I'm not sure I need to show another video about privilege walks, since David showed one last class and Crystal showed one this class. This one that I attached, let's see. This one that I attached is a little bit more problematic, but it kind of asks you, what might be some of the critiques or criticisms of privilege walks? What did this video make you realize? Are there any problems with privilege walks, do you think? How long is it? 5 minutes?
Everybody line up. We're about to race. Everybody line up. No.
So this is high schoolers.
Take off your backpacks.
Oops. So he, you know what?
$100 bill.
Here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna speed it up.
Line up, everybody line up. We're about to race. Everybody line up. Shoulder to shoulder, take off your backpack. Basketball, line up, we're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this, a $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm gonna make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I've said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go.
Okay, yeah, that's enough. All right. So, you know, just kind of write down if you like take like 2 minutes to write down, like, is there anything problematic about this? What do you think? About this particular one or about privilege walks in general or both?
No, stop us. No.
Okay, so Martha posted something really good. She talked about how like the issue with this walk might be like the $100 bill, right? Which is a slap in the face for people that were not able to move off the line. This is kind of similar to a lot of the critique that privilege walks get. So especially in this particular video, also like there's the assumption or the like a problematic / a little bit racist kind of assumption that Black kids are naturally more athletic and athletically inclined, right? When he says like, I guarantee you these Black kids would probably have smoked y'all, right? Stuff like that. Some of the critique of, do you remember all the kind of close-ups of especially the kids of color? Kind of related to Crystal's video when like the Black guy said like, you know, this is just, you know, it reminds me of when I learned about slavery in school, and this is just, you know, you're mad for a couple days and you realize this is just the way it is. What might be some of the problems with privilege walks?
For me, I said that while I think it's important for like the more privileged people to realize that like they do have privilege. I think it could make the people who are at a disadvantage feel worse about themselves.
Exactly, right? Privilege walks are almost like a reflection of privilege, almost like, and a reinforcement of privilege, right? In that it kind of victimizes people without privilege to kind of prove a point to people with privilege. I mean, it's still a kind of important thing to kind of think about and do, but like a lot of people have like either stopped doing privilege walks in general, or they've inverted the privilege walks, so that like the more privilege you have, the farther back you start instead of the farther forward you start. And so like that's, I think, a much better thing because it's less likely to kind of traumatize and victimize people who already are traumatized and victimized by our culture every day, right? Like if you're a person of color in America, you don't need to like know that like you don't have as much privilege, right? That you're not allowed to do as many things. It's totally for the white people in the room, right? So this is another kind of, it's almost like using people of color as like props to prove, you know, a very good message. Like the message is legit, but like I'm not always sure that privilege walks are kind of the way to do it, right? Good, makes sense. And so Martha, also like your kind of point here, like why does one person competing have to win the $100, right? He's got $100 bill. Why doesn't he exchange that for $1 bills and just give everyone $1? I mean, this is probably the socialist in me, but I totally think like that would be a way more equitable thing. Even more well, that's the more equal thing. And even more equitable is like, you know, give $5 to the one in the very back and like 50 cents to the ones in the front, right?
If it were up to me, I wouldn't even do it with money because
yeah, why money?
He even said like the people in the front already have a head start. So like you're just giving them the okay, like here's free money because you have a head start.
Yes. And so it's still kind of this particular privilege walk kind of still equates success with wealth and money, right? And maybe that's a problem. Maybe that's a psychological problem. Exactly, Martha. I think you're right on. And like I was going to say something else too. And it's still kind of puts the onus on people of color to still like work extra hard, right? And like, you know, if you're good enough, if you're fast enough, you can still win the money, right? It's a pretty problematic thing, this particular example of a privilege walk. Okay. Tell me about the documentary. This is a little old these days, this documentary. It's not as well, it's still pretty relevant. But for those of you who are able to watch the documentary, kind of what is the situation of the kid who made this? Young man.
I think one of the most unique things about the documentary that kind of kept me really interested was the fact that he was in that top 1%.
Yeah.
And he was looking down at it like he was not proud of it at all. He wanted to change it and he wanted to see that change. And he was asking the questions that needed to be asked, no matter how painful they were.
And how much resistance he encountered, even from his own family, right?
Yeah, he didn't really let his dad discourage him where most might. They might let their own family kind of talk them away from that idea and like stop going towards it and just no, stop taking this path, take a new one. You don't need to do this. You have the money, you have the wealth, just shut up about it.
Yeah. So the guy who made this is the heir, Jamie Johnson. He's the heir to the Johnson & Johnson company. So he is definitely in like the top 1%. And he kind of talks to Milton Friedman about trickle-down economics. Have you ever heard of trickle-down economics? Given you're at a business school, what are trickle-down economics?
Is that when tax benefits and tax breaks for the wealthy will kind of benefit the lower classes?
Yes.
So,
the idea is we shouldn't tax or even regulate capitalism, because the more money the people at the top are going to make, the more like they'll hire, and they'll buy, and then that wealth will trickle down naturally through the invisible hand of capitalism. Right? Why is this? So Milton Friedman is still all about this idea, and a lot of people still buy into the idea of trickle down economics. Why is this a problem? Why is it false? Why is it a myth?
Because it has to do with class. So if you come from like a lower class, like you want better for yourself, but as far as this myth, it basically says that it's more or less impossible.
And also like these families are really interested in always increasing their wealth, right? Like they just need more, they need more and more and more and more. And so like the idea of trickle down economics is like, okay, once you get to an idea, like you'll have enough and then you'll start to kind of buy stuff and like, that'll fix things, but they just want more and more and more money, right? And so instead of like working and getting an income, they focus on growing their wealth through investing in stocks and bonds and stuff like that, right? So they talk about, he interviews this cab driver in Florida or New Orleans, I can't remember. You guys saw this bit about that kid in Chicago, right, who bought the condo? Do you remember? Anything strike you about that?
Didn't he say something like that building like a new police station in the townhomes, and then even though there's gonna be more crime and stuff, he said that that's the easier way or something like that?
Yeah, it might be kind of worth kind of rewatching it, even though I have like 2 minutes left. I probably should have spent more time on the documentary today, but like the idea is like this guy knows exactly what he's doing. Like he's describing it and you think like he's going to say something about how like awful it is or how unequal it is, and then he just kind of goes with like, and that's the way we get rid of these people, and it's just like mind-blowing. It's around 18 minutes in. It's kind of
same way to get it the forward. Man, see, the truth though, condos will be there and then the subway will be there.
Overall, I think gentrification is a tool that solidifies the stratification of classes. There are people who live in an area that becomes 100% people like them. 3 big tools have been used in a lot of areas. First, you build a big police station. Secondly, you tear out all the basketball courts. And lastly, if there's a local public school that poor people attend, you tear down the school.
They closed 3 schools up in our neighborhood. The middle school, the high school, and the baby school. Why? Closed 3 buildings. I don't know. I guess they trying to push us out the neighborhood. It's decent people living in the project. Pay their rent, people work. Everybody ain't the enemy. Hey, what's happening? You live here. I lived here approximately my whole life, 28 years to be exact. So this is the garbage they put up there.
I'm just gonna speed this up.
The problem they had is fixed. Since a lot of the phones used to work when the police used to have a police station right here. This used to be a police station right there. What happened to that? We ran them away. The other people ran them away because they was on BS. They got mailboxes. Half the doors don't lock on the mailboxes. Do I have any mail? I ain't checking the mailbox today.
Yeah.
I got a bill from a children that I never get a newspaper, but they change the neighborhood is changing the neighborhood around us, not to us, around us. We got 1.5 schools out here. 35 kids, one classroom, one teacher. You can't teach everybody else, They need some help. So that's our kids. When they go back, they ain't gonna teach them. They gonna run away. This land is worth more than what the niggas over here can get. So what makes you do them? Displace them, and the ones that you over here, get rid of. You get rid of. And what's used as an excuse? Use the drug dealers, use the cocaine guys. You know what I'm saying? Cocaine dealers. You know what I'm saying? Use the people that's over here doing nonsense to try to get rid of nonsense. We do that. One bill to the next bill to the next bill. You can sit up here and talk all you want to, but guess what? We love our kids. This is my son. This is my son. Do you feel like your kids have an opportunity to get rich in this country? Hell no, they ain't gonna be rappers. My kids ain't gonna be rappers. They ain't gonna be rich.
It's easier to just cleanse the earth of these people, send them to the far reaches of the universe, and the mayor's office will build a big police station, build a bunch of townhouses, the yuppies will buy in and bourgeoify it, and suddenly we'll have a community. Yeah, there'll be a bunch of people displaced. Yeah, there'll be a bunch of crime problems, but it's easier. We found an easy solution.
So that part especially like is like really kind of illustrative of like the fact that like in order to get equality and the best for all, like we really need to kind of make these people, they're not going to kind of wake up one day and kind of realize how immoral they are and immoral inequality is. They have kind of bought this hook, line, and sinker, and they're really, really totally invested in kind of maintaining their position of privilege. And they're taught that unlike most of us, they're taught just, to recognize it and to kind of perpetuate it. If you're interested in writing more about the documentary, also like the idea is like people in, we have like dark money in politics, which means like people who are rich, they buy political allegiance from both Democrats and Republicans so that no legislation will get made to kind of limit their money making. And then you have about 40 minutes in, one guy who gave up the life and then was cut out by his family. And then an hour in, there's a really good explanation of Hurricane Katrina and what happened in New Orleans back in, about 20 years ago. All right. I didn't get to all of our activities. I didn't get to show you as much of the video as I wanted to, but that's life. So work on your memoirs. I'm excited to read them. So have fun writing them, and I'm pretty excited. And have a good weekend. Thanks for those of you who stuck around.
Do you still want us to finish that last discussion post, or
which one is that one?
The what's the difference between race and class, do you think, based on material we read for today?
How about for an extra point?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
Bye.
Have a good day.
You too.
And a good weekend.
Yeah, you too.
I have a question.
Go for it, Crystal.
So I asked Hannah this as like we were talking about like the memoirs at first, like right before I started the presentation and stuff. Could I do it about like white privilege?
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel like for people, especially for white guys in the class, that masculinity is going to be kind of what they write about.
Yeah, I feel like as far as like my thing for white privilege, like what I would mainly talk about is like, in a sense, kind of being like an outsider to it.
Yeah.
Because like for me, like I'm the server, so in a sense, like anybody that like comes in, I'm technically in a way like their slave.
Yeah. You can definitely talk about like privilege. It's a kind of it's class privilege, but it's also gender privilege because usually the servers are women.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna touch upon too.
And the cooks are usually men.
Yeah,
and the men get a fixed.
Talk about.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and this is we're going to talk about this in a couple of classes when we start talking about work. How women's values are always, or women's jobs. Traditionally, women's jobs are always paid less.
Okay.
And then once the men start to enter that profession, suddenly the paychecks go up magically, mystically.
Yeah, weird, right?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that you're so much of an outsider to white privilege. I think it's more of a gendered thing. You could do a little bit of white privilege if you wanted to, but like you could kind of like also talk about like if you were a woman of color, you would probably get tipped less, right?
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah. Thanks. That's all I had.
Sounds good. Bye. Have a good weekend. Hey, Hannah.
Hey, no, I was just there for moral support for Crystal. Yeah, she texted me and she's like, well, can I do it on like what I did it on? I was like, well, you can do it on the things like a relative experience that you have had based on the things we've discussed up until this point.
Yeah.
And I said the nice things about this class is that they're all different subjects of the same
Intersectionality is what we're doing next class.
Right. So they all intertwine. So I was like, so you're gonna get more than one topic in there. Like I wrote it on religion, like when I wrote my memoir.
That's right.
Because I'm Jewish.
I thought it
wrote
was oh yeah. But also like the learning disability, right?
Yes, dyslexia and all of that. Yeah, how like
Disability, right? I put in quotation marks.
right, like and it's
Or not really.
it's just
Yeah. Learning difference.
So yeah, I was just there for moral support. That's all.
Cool.
Well, have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Thanks for all these PowerPoints. They really make my life easier.
Yeah, no, I sort of enjoy doing them because they help me because I'm really like technology wise, I suck. I just do. I just do. Like I can't help it. Everything breaks on me. Like even Microsoft Word doesn't work for me sometimes. I'm so sick of technology. So it helps me get more
Especially now,
comfortable.
right?
Yeah. Oh, especially now. So it helps me get a little bit more comfortable. I'm able to like put on my resume, like underneath like my TA, like worked on PowerPoints. I did this.
I made them
It
pretty.
helps.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good weekend.
You too.